What if the greatest secret of our past isn't hidden in ancient ruins or lost civilizations, but locked inside government vaults you were never meant to see? What if the real story of humanity, the erased chapters, the forbidden discoveries, the altered timelines, was quietly rewritten not by accident, but by design? In this investigation, 10 government archives that confirm history was rewritten. We're pulling back the curtain on files once guarded by secrecy redactions and entire departments dedicated to keeping their contents buried. Today, you'll hear about documents that scholars weren't supposed to find, excavations that vanished from records, and witnesses whose testimonies were sealed away for decades. And if you enjoy deep dives into hidden history like this one, make sure you stay with us because every minute ahead will challenge what you thought you knew about the world. Number 10 is a vault that was never supposed to exist. The Bureau of Ethnology. Suppressed findings file housed deep within the early records of the Smithsonian Institution. To the public, the Smithsonian has always stood as a symbol of scientific transparency. But hidden among its 19th century archive boxes is a collection of correspondence and excavation memos that tell a very different story, one suggesting that the early custodians of American archaeology quietly reshaped the narrative of the continent's past. It begins in the 1880s when Smithsonian field teams were dispatched across the Midwest to study thousands of mysterious earthworks and burial mounds. Official reports describe them as simple structures belonging to early Native American cultures. But internal letters, many stamped confidential, hint at something far stranger. Several excavators wrote of skeletal remains far larger than expected burial chambers reinforced with stonework resembling Old World architecture and artifacts with inscriptions that didn't match any known indigenous language. Some even referenced findings incompatible with the accepted timeline of American prehistory. These statements never reached the public. Instead, the Bureau of Ethnology issued sanitized summaries, sometimes omitting entire dig sites. Excavation teams were reassigned. Artifacts were shipped to Washington, logged in temporary inventories, and then disappeared. Later audits revealed missing crates, mislabeled specimens, and destroyed materials with no explanation. A former curator, writing in a private letter decades later, claimed that certain discoveries were suppressed because they threatened the conventional anthropological framework. The most striking document is a 1894 memo recommending the closure of multiple mound sites due to interpretive complications. It is the only memo of its kind in the archive. The language is careful, almost clinical, but the implication is unmistakable. Some discoveries didn't fit the official story, so the story was adjusted. Historians who eventually gained access to these materials were stunned. While none of the documents alone rewrites history together, they reveal a pattern, a deliberate filtering of evidence. And that filtering has shaped the educational narrative for generations. The question isn't just what was found, but why someone decided it should be forgotten. Because if the earliest national institution dedicated to archaeology was willing to frame the past selectively, what else might have been rewritten in the name of order, consistency, or control? Number 9 is the Vatican's Index of Forbidden Excavations, a rarely discussed subset of documents stored within the Archivum Secretum, now rebranded as the Apostolic Archives. While the main archive is legendary for its restricted access and centuries-old manuscripts, this smaller, almost mythical collection contains field notes, papal directives, and sealed excavation orders relating to archaeological digs conducted or halted under church authority. The earliest entries date to the late Renaissance, when explorers and scholars across Europe were racing to uncover the physical origins of the biblical world. Many of these expeditions were funded by the church itself, yet strangely dozens of their final reports never saw daylight. What emerged instead were brief summaries carefully worded and often stripped of context. The originals, however, remain locked behind layers of clearance accessible only to a handful of archivists. One of the most controversial files involves an excavation beneath a ruined monastery in Anatolia during the 1720s. The initial field journal describes the discovery of stone tablets written in a script resembling Proto-Hebrew, but with references to a pre-Adamic lineage. Such an idea, humans existing before the biblical Adam, would have destabilized centuries of theological doctrine. After the first week of digging, the lead archaeologist's entries abruptly stop. A papal nuncio arrived, the site was sealed, and all artifacts were transported to Rome. The monastery's ruins were later reconstructed to prevent further digging. Another file references a 19th century excavation in North Africa where researchers allegedly uncovered a burial site containing writings that suggested early Christian groups held cosmologies far more aligned with Eastern traditions than the Church has historically acknowledged. The official record claims the site yielded nothing of significance, but internal memos reveal crates of material were catalogued assigned provisional numbers and then relocated into an unnamed repository inside Vatican walls. Perhaps the most intriguing document in this forbidden collection is a directive issued in 1911, stating that certain archaeological findings must remain unavailable to scholars due to potential confusion among the faithful. The phrase is carefully chosen but unmistakable. Something was found, something profound enough that the Church feared what would happen if it entered mainstream history. These hidden excavations don't prove a conspiracy, but they do prove one undeniable fact. For centuries, powerful institutions have quietly shaped which parts of the past humanity is allowed to see. And when an organization with the reach and influence of the Vatican chooses secrecy, the reasons are rarely simple. Number 8 is the Soviet Anomalous Chronology Division. Records a cache of Cold War-era documents once buried inside the labyrinthine archives of the KGB. Officially, this department never existed. Unofficially, it was a small, intensely secretive task force created in the 1950s to investigate archaeological discoveries that contradicted the Marxist-Leninist interpretation of human development. During the Soviet era, history was more than a science. It was a tool of ideology. The party insisted on a linear progression of civilizations, each shaped by economic struggle. Anything that suggested leaps in technology, unexplained cultural diffusion, or advanced ancient engineering threatened this narrative. So when researchers across the USSR encountered anomalies, the findings bypassed universities and museums. They went straight to the division. One of the earliest classified cases came from the Ural Mountains, where geologists conducting surveys for mineral deposits uncovered a series of metallic microstructures embedded in rock layers hundreds of thousands of years old. Publicly, the discovery was dismissed as natural crystallization. But internal memos show that KGB analysts debated whether the objects represented artificial components, something akin to miniature coils or filaments, far too precise for the era suggested by the rock strata. If true, they pointed to technological activity long before humans were believed to exist. Another file details the discovery of a collapsed tunnel complex in the Caucasus. Archaeologists noted that the stone-cutting techniques resembled machine precision with smooth surfaces and geometric angles inconsistent with known ancient tools. Yet photographs recovered decades later show that the site was quickly sealed, flooded, and reclassified as a military zone to prevent further study. A handwritten note on the final page reads, "Historical implications unacceptable. Halt immediately." But the most revealing entry in the division's collection comes from 1968 following a dig near the shores of Lake Issyk-Kul. There, divers reported retrieving inscribed ceramic tablets from submerged ruins. The symbols did not match any known Central Asian script. Linguists privately suggested they belonged to a culture predating all established regional civilizations. Within days, the tablets were confiscated and the entire site was declared off-limits for national security. When the USSR collapsed, some of these archives briefly surfaced in the chaos, only to vanish again into private collections or newly sealed government archives. What remains accessible through secondary leaks, however, paints a clear picture. The Soviet Union actively controlled historical narratives with the same precision it applied to its political ideology. And if a superpower was willing to bury discoveries that disrupted its worldview, what does that tell us about the fragility of the timeline we've been taught? Number 7 is the British Ministry of Defence's Black Pyramid Papers, a series of restricted files connected to classified excavations conducted in Egypt during the height of the British Protectorate. While the MOD is not typically associated with archaeology, these documents, long buried in defense intelligence folders, reveal a startling intersection between military operations and the rewriting of ancient history. In 1904, British forces occupying Egypt reported unusual activity near Dashur, where the bent and red pyramids dominate the desert horizon. Local workers claimed they had uncovered a series of underground chambers beneath a lesser-known structure they called El Haram El Aswad, the Black Pyramid. Initially dismissed as rumor, the site drew military attention only after officers received reports of unusual metallic artifacts emerging on the antiquities black market, allegedly sourced from the same location. Internal MOD correspondence shows that a covert team of engineers and archaeologists was dispatched to survey and secure the site. Their early notes, still partially preserved, describe a labyrinth of tunnels with walls made not just of stone, but of a hardened vitrified material that appeared melted as though exposed to extreme heat. One engineer compared it to obsidian fused with metal, a combination impossible for any known ancient civilization. Deeper inside, the team discovered a sealed chamber containing fragments of what appeared to be engraved plates. The markings did not match hieroglyphs, Proto-Sinaitic script, or any writing system known to Egyptologists. One officer wrote privately that the symbols resembled astronomical diagrams mixed with something like circuitry. Within weeks, the MOD shut down all access to the site. Cairo newspapers reported the area had been reclassified as a military zone due to unstable structures. Yet the Black Pyramid itself remained untouched by mainstream archaeology for decades. When Egypt finally regained full control and researchers attempted to revisit the area, they found key chambers collapsed, conveniently burying whatever had once been inside. The most chilling document in the archive is a 1922 directive stating that any findings that risk integrating mythological chronology with material evidence should be withheld until geopolitical stability is assured. The phrasing is vague, but its intent is unmistakable. Discoveries that blurred the line between legend and history were deemed too explosive for public knowledge. Today, only fragments of the Black Pyramid papers remain unredacted, but what they reveal suggests that at least one government believed ancient Egypt held secrets capable of reshaping the world's timeline, and that those secrets were best kept under military lock and key. Number 6 is the US War Department's Operation Eclipse dossiers. A shadowy collection of files declassified only in fragments, each hinting at a World War II-era race, not just for weapons or intelligence, but for control over ancient history itself. These documents, scattered across microfilms and misfiled boxes, reveal a covert program dedicated to acquiring artifacts and manuscripts from regions under Axis influence, objects believed to contain knowledge that could alter humanity's understanding of its origins. The operation began in 1943, when Allied intelligence intercepted reports that Nazi archaeological units had unearthed something extraordinary in the mountains of northern Italy, an ancient codex bound in a material that chemists could not identify, with pages containing diagrams of celestial patterns far too precise for the era in which the codex was believed to have been created. The Nazis hoped it would provide evidence for their distorted theories of ancestral supremacy. But what alarmed the War Department was not ideology. It was the possibility that the book's contents pointed to an advanced, forgotten civilization predating known history. A specialized American unit was assembled, composed of linguists, cryptographers, and field agents skilled in covert recovery. Their mission: intercept the codex and any related artifacts before they crossed into Germany. The recovered documents show that during the final months of the war, the team seized crates from a remote Alpine convoy. Among them were fragments of metallic tablets etched with patterns reminiscent of star maps and energy diagrams, designs eerily similar to those discovered in other parts of the world, yet attributed to completely unrelated cultures. What happened next was even stranger. According to internal memos, the War Department established a secure research cell in Washington, where a select group attempted to decode the materials. Their notes describe anomalous properties metals that resisted all attempts at identification, inks that glowed faintly under ultraviolet light, and inscriptions that seemed to encode mathematical ratios still used in orbital mechanics. Yet barely a year later, the entire program was dissolved. Funding was cut, personnel reassigned, and all artifacts were transferred to an undisclosed federal repository. The official reasons cited lack of scientific relevance, but a handwritten margin note on one of the final reports reads, "Implications too disruptive. Recommend indefinite suppression." Decades later, a portion of the Operation Eclipse files resurfaced during routine declassification. But the most crucial documents, the Codex, the metallic tablets, the analysis reports, remain missing. Not destroyed, not misfiled, simply gone. Which raises the question, what discovery could compel a government to hide not just an artifact, but the very knowledge of its existence? Number 5 is the French National Archives' Cartographic Suppression Project, a classified program that quietly altered map survey notes and territorial records across the 17th to 20th centuries. While at first glance this may sound like a mundane bureaucratic initiative, the surviving documents suggest something far more provocative: the systematic removal of locations, structures, and anomalies that contradicted France's official historical narrative. The program began during the reign of Louis XIV, when royal cartographers were ordered to produce the first unified maps of the kingdom. In the margins of those early atlases are cryptic notations omit. Mask reclassify beside symbols representing old fortifications, forgotten settlements, and in some cases geometric earthworks with no known cultural origin. These markings were not artistic corrections, they were surgical edits. What disappeared from the maps soon vanished from public awareness. But the project expanded dramatically during the 19th century as Napoleon's campaigns brought French surveyors across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. Soldiers returned with stories of ancient structures intentionally left unrecorded polygonal stone complexes in Algeria, subterranean chambers beneath the Pyrenees, and ruins in the Balkans, displaying architectural techniques not associated with any regional culture. In each case, the Cartographic Division's internal correspondence classified the sites as chronologically problematic or incompatible with academic consensus. One especially revealing dossier concerns a set of detailed maps produced during an 1838 survey of the Sahara. The original charts, never published, show a vast region filled with rectangular foundations, grid-like patterns and straight-line pathways stretching for kilometers. To this day, no known civilization in that region constructed anything similar. Yet the official colonial maps released to the public portray the same area as barren, featureless desert. The suppressed originals were locked in a sealed archive labelled non-conforme à l'histoire établie, not aligned with established history. Then there are the aerial reconnaissance photographs from World War I. French pilots captured images of symmetrical shapes carved into remote mountainsides, circles perfectly inscribed in stone plains, and what appear to be ancient star-aligned structures predating Celtic settlements by millennia. Instead of being analysed by archaeologists, these photos were diverted to a military classification office, where most were either destroyed or folded into restricted collections. The trail culminates in a memo from 1947 stating that cartographic clarity must prioritise national coherence over enigmatic relics of unknown provenance. In other words, if a discovery didn't fit France's preferred historical storyline, it was quietly erased from the national memory, literally wiped from the map. So the question lingers: how many places we believe never existed were simply removed, and what histories were buried under the neat lines of an approved atlas? Number 4 is Japan's Chrono-Contingency archives, a little-known collection of documents held within the National Diet Library and overseen, according to scattered testimonies, by a joint committee of the Cabinet Office and the Agency for Cultural Affairs. Officially, these archives compile research on historical preservation. Unofficially, they contain material that suggests certain discoveries were concealed because they disrupted Japan's tightly curated historical timeline. The story begins in the 1920s when archaeologists first excavated the ruins of Asuka. The site is famous for its mysterious carved stones and unusual megalithic formations, many of which defy easy classification. Most of the finds were publicly reported, but a parallel logbook later uncovered by a retired researcher revealed a second category labelled Type C anomalies. These included stone fragments bearing non-Japanese runic markings, metallic implements of unknown alloy, and what appeared to be astronomical diagrams oriented toward constellations that held no significance in early Japanese cosmology. According to the suppressed documents, these anomalies were boxed and shipped to Tokyo under military escort. Their existence was omitted from all published excavation results. But the Chrono-Contingency archives point to a far more dramatic episode, the 1949 Kibi Valley discovery. Farmers digging irrigation channels unearthed a sealed chamber containing clay tablets with inscriptions unlike kanji kana or any continental script. Linguists who privately examined rubbings claimed the symbols displayed structural similarities to early Polynesian writing, yet the chamber's estimated age predated known Polynesian contact by thousands of years. The implications were staggering: a transoceanic cultural exchange long before recorded Japanese history. Within days, officials from the newly formed post-war government intervened. The site was bulldozed for agricultural stabilization, the chamber destroyed, and the artifacts transferred into a classified vault. The public explanation described the tablets as weathered stones of no historical value. Things grew even stranger in the 1960s when construction crews in Hokkaido uncovered a subterranean structure lined with basalt blocks cut so precisely that modern engineers questioned whether ancient tools could have produced them. Early photographs, now extremely rare, showed tight interlocking joints identical to those found in South American megalithic sites. Yet once again the official report declared the structure a natural formation and the findings were sealed. By the 1980s, a formal directive was drafted establishing the Chrono-Contingency archives. Its purpose, according to one leaked introduction page, to consolidate artifacts whose historical impact may induce chronological dissonance. That phrase alone suggests a deliberate effort to maintain a coherent version of Japan's past, even if the evidence pointed elsewhere. If governments selectively curate their history to protect cultural identity, what truths lie buried beneath those curated stories? And how different might Japan's and the world's timeline look if these hidden findings were revealed? Number 3 is Germany's Ahnenerbe Cryptic Codex Registry, a fragmented and partially destroyed collection of documents tied to the infamous Ahnenerbe, an organization founded under the Third Reich to research what it called ancestral heritage. Most people know the Ahnenerbe for its pseudo-scientific racial theories. But hidden within its lesser-known files is a trove of material that suggests its agenda went far beyond propaganda. These researchers were hunting for something far older, far more disruptive evidence of advanced ancient civilizations that didn't fit any accepted historical framework. The registry was compiled between 1935 and 1942 and was intended only for high-ranking members of the SS. At the center of it were reports from expeditions to Tibet, the Middle East, the Caucasus, and even South America. Publicly, these missions were framed as cultural studies. Privately, their purpose was to locate artifacts and manuscripts believed to contain knowledge from a pre-Ice Age global culture, what some within the organization called Urtechnik, or primordial technology. One of the most revealing entries comes from a 1938 mission to the Himalayas. The team's field logs describe a stone vault containing copper scrolls, etched with unfamiliar symbols arranged in spirals, some resembling electrical schematics centuries ahead of their time. The scrolls were photographed but then confiscated upon the team's return. Their current whereabouts are unknown. Even more unsettling are the partially recovered documents from an expedition to Bolivia in 1941. The Ahnenerbe researchers studied megalithic ruins near Lake Titicaca structures that modern archaeologists still struggle to explain. According to the registry, they found basalt blocks fused together with a vitrified glaze, hinting at construction methods involving extreme heat or unknown bonding technologies. The documents state that the site was declared of the highest strategic importance and all reports were sealed. But the most controversial component of the registry is a series of translated fragments from a manuscript referred to simply as Codex H27. The language is untraceable, but the diagrams depict celestial alignments from more than 12,000 years ago. Alignments that modern astronomers have since verified were indeed visible at that time. If genuine, the Codex would imply that its creators possessed precise astronomical knowledge millennia before the earliest recorded civilizations. After the fall of Berlin, Allied intelligence seized portions of the registry. Some documents were transferred to the US under Operation Paperclip. Others vanished into Soviet vaults. Many were destroyed in the chaos of the war's final days. What remains is fragmented yet consistent enough to raise an unsettling possibility. The Ahnenerbe was not merely rewriting history for ideological reasons. They were searching for traces of a lost chapter of humanity, one that modern institutions still struggle or refuse to acknowledge. Number 2 is the Chinese Academy of Sciences Tao Protocol. Records a cryptic set of documents that surfaced briefly during a 1990s reorganization of China's National Research Archives. Officially, the Tao Protocol was a multidisciplinary initiative to catalogue paleontological and archaeological finds across remote regions. But buried inside its restricted files lies evidence suggesting the project's true purpose was far more enigmatic: to investigate anomalies that hinted at a prehistoric technological culture predating dynastic China by tens of thousands of years. The earliest Tao documents describe surveys in the Bayanha Mountains where researchers uncovered perfectly cylindrical boreholes drilled into quartzite, a feat difficult even with modern equipment. The public report attributed them to recent industrial activity. Yet the private logbooks note that the holes were sealed with mineral deposits at least 40,000 years old. A red stamp across the page reads, "Classified Geological Curiosity. Do not publish." Another Tao case concerns the underwater ruins at Fuxian Lake. Official narratives describe the formations as natural rock patterns, but the protocol's internal photographs, leaked briefly before disappearing, show terraced platforms, right-angled corridors and steps cut with astonishing precision. One diver's account claims he found an engraved slab depicting a star pattern matching the sky not of today, but of 10,500 BCE. That detail was omitted from all released research. But here's where the twist begins. Among the Tau records is a memo dated 1997 written in cautious formal language. It references correspondence with foreign agencies regarding chronological alignment discrepancies. The phrase suggests China was not working alone, that other nations had quietly approached them seeking to compare anomalous findings. The memo warns that sharing certain data could result in global revision of accepted anthropological timelines. Even stranger is the final entry in the Tau Protocol found in a half-redacted report from Yunnan province. It mentions a chamber discovered deep inside a mountain tunnel. Inside were fractally carved stone panels and an alloy fragment that, according to the metallurgical notes, contained isotopic ratios unlikely to occur naturally on Earth. The report ends abruptly. The remaining pages are missing. Shortly after the Tau Protocol was officially dissolved, researchers were reassigned, funding disappeared, and every mention of the project was scrubbed from public scientific databases. The twist: a decade later, multiple Tau researchers independently left cryptic statements hinting that the anomalies were not isolated, but interconnected. They suggested the sites formed part of a global pattern, one that governments might have recognized but chose not to reveal. If True Number 2 isn't just an archive, it's part of a quiet international understanding that the origins of civilization may be far older and far stranger than the world is allowed to believe. Number 1 is the United Nations Continuity of Civilization Registry, a set of ultra-restricted documents so obscure that even many UN delegates have never heard of it. Officially, the registry does not exist, but references to it appear in internal memos, diplomatic cables, and a handful of leaked briefings, enough to piece together a chilling possibility that the UN maintains a classified global archive of discoveries indicating humanity suffered a catastrophic reset in the distant past and rose again. The registry appears to have been established shortly after World War II, when newly formed international coalitions began pooling archaeological, geological, and astronomical data. At first, the collaboration was benign, an effort to standardize historical research. But everything changed in 1952, when 3 unrelated nations, Norway, India, and Chile, submitted reports describing massive submerged structures off their coasts, each with architectural features implying a shared origin. None of the sites matched known civilizations. A confidential UN working group analyzed the findings and reached a conclusion. So radical, it was sealed immediately. The structures were the remnants of an advanced maritime culture that existed before the end of the last ice age. And more alarming than the discovery itself was the realization that similar anomalies had been quietly documented elsewhere: Japan, the Red Sea, the Caribbean, even beneath Antarctic ice. The registry grew rapidly. By the 1970s, it contained classified reports on high-altitude ruins in the Andes with machining marks suggesting tools beyond Bronze Age capabilities. Sediment cores showing global flooding patterns aligned with oral flood myths across multiple continents. Ancient star maps uncovered in Africa and Australia depicting constellations as they appeared 20,000 years ago. But the most significant and disturbing section of the registry came from a joint analysis undertaken in 1988. It examined dozens of anomalous sites and concluded they were arranged according to a geodetic system far more precise than the coordinate grid used today. Someone somewhere in humanity's forgotten past had mapped the entire Earth with mathematical sophistication that should not have existed. What terrified the committee more was the implication found in a final report. The pattern suggested not just a vanished civilization, but multiple cycles of civilization rising and falling over tens of thousands of years. Extinctions, resets, restarts, a hidden timeline beneath our recorded one. The UN's recommendation was quiet, but absolute. The registry must remain sealed to prevent destabilization of historical, cultural, and religious frameworks worldwide. Even today, diplomats who whisper about it say the same thing. Humanity may not be the first advanced society on this planet, only the latest. If these archives teach us anything, it's that history is not a fixed narrative. It's a battlefield of ideas, guarded entries, and quiet omissions. The clues hidden in these government vaults suggest a far more intricate human story than the one we're taught: civilizations rising and vanishing, knowledge lost, and rediscovered timelines rewritten not once but many times. And if this much has surfaced despite suppression, imagine what still lies sealed in basements, bunkers, and forgotten repositories around the world. In our next investigation, we'll push even deeper into the forbidden manuscripts. anomalous artifacts, and silenced testimonies that hint at a chapter of human history we've barely begun to uncover. So if mysteries like these ignite your curiosity, you'll want to stay close. The trail only gets stranger from here. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed today's story, make sure to like and subscribe. It truly helps me create more content for you.